Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I know what time it is. We know it's 6 o'clock on the East Coast, so we've got a lot to get to in the next, not 1, but 2 hours. We begin tonight with a nation divided. On one side, we have President Biden calling for unity and championing the country's progress on beating the pandemic.
Today, all across this nation, we can say with confidence, America is coming back together. History tells us that when we stand together, when we unite in common cause, when we see ourselves not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans, then there's simply no limit to what we can achieve.
And then on the other side, there's Florida man, still holding his MAGA cult rallies and spreading the big lie about the election. And we're not going to play what he said, not just because it's really, frankly, sad how much of a sore loser he is, but because his claims are downright dangerous at this point. He knows exactly what he's doing, riling up his supporters and then giving them hope that somehow he'll magically come back into office, which is never going to happen. And he's gone even further than usual in the past week, asking the menacing question, who killed Ashley Babbitt? Putting the officer who shot Babbitt as she attempted to breach the doors leading to the speaker's lobby where congressional staffers were cowering in terror, putting that officer in danger. That officer has been cleared of all wrongdoing. But it's the latest line that Republicans like Paul Gosar are trying during congressional hearings that are supposed to be focusing on our national security. It's pretty obvious that Republicans are doing everything they can to show loyalty to the Mango Mussolini and not to their country. And it's not just the ones currently in office. The Washington Post reports that Republican candidates for state and federal offices are increasingly focused on the last election, running on the falsehood spread by the Florida man and his allies. But there's nothing that really exemplifies the undying fealty that Republicans have to their dear leader, like J.D. Vance, an Ohio Republican Senate candidate and author of Hillbilly Elegy, who CNN caught deleting past tweets critical of Trump. He told Fox today, I regret the tweets and regret being wrong about the guy. I think he was a good president because, of course, now he wants power. Because right now, there is no Republican Party without Trump. There's just nothing that exists without him. So Americans are facing a choice between the real world, where coronavirus cases are falling and the economy is bouncing back, and a fantasy world on the right, where the election was stolen and everything is a culture war. Alexander Burns of the New York Times points out that in another age, the events of this season, namely Biden's success, would have been nearly certain to produce a significant shift in American politics. But these days, it's hard to imagine that such a political turning point is at hand. He notes that a moment of truth appears imminent. It's one that will reveal whether the American electorate is still capable of large-scale shifts in opinion or whether the country is essentially locked into a schism for the foreseeable future, with roughly 53% of Americans on one side and 47% on the other. And joining me now is Eugene Daniels, White House correspondent for Politico, Susan Del Percio, Republican strategist, and Joan Walsh, national affairs correspondent for The Nation. And thank you all for being here. Eugene, I'll start with you because you cover the White House, and I wonder if they get that. I do sometimes wonder, just talking to people close to the White House myself, whether they're fully aware of what a schismatic country they're running, one in which all the great things that President Biden talks about and does simply wash over about 47% of the public because they think QAnon is real.
Yeah, I mean, usually what I find is that the people who are a bit older, who've been with Biden for longer, tend to think that the country can come back together, tend to think that unity is not, is something that is in our reach even, sometime this year. And the younger folks are a little bit more cynical, right? These are people who were on this campaign. This may have been their first or second campaign out there in the world talking to folks. We spend a lot of time on Twitter, and Twitter's not the real world, but it does show and exemplify the schism that exists in the world. And so I think the White House, some people know and some people don't, but I think all of them, with President Biden at the very top, do want, this country to come back together. They talk about it a lot more than I thought they would. We're about 6 months in, and you think that, okay, they've stopped talking about the fantasy, they stopped talking about all the love, and they haven't. They really, that is something that is at the heart of this, mostly because of Joe Biden. So they know what's going on, but I think they are hopeful that because of who Joe Biden is, they can overcome it. But it is, like you said, very, very difficult to see that actually happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to want that. Joan Walsh, you wrote the book, What's the Matter with White People, which I wish everyone would read because, and I know your publisher was probably not thrilled with the title of the book. And I know we talked about that. But, I mean, you wrote that during the Obama era. I mean, the reality is that there's been this fantasy out there that we could reach this age of sort of magical reckoning, racial healing, that because we elected President Obama, that would happen. All we got was a backlash that's so ferocious that now 47% of the country is kind of clinical, right? They really do think, there are a lot of them who really think that Donald Trump is going to literally be magically reimposed in office in August. That's going to happen. They think Mike Lindell is sane, right? I don't know how you fix something that an entire political party has invested itself in maintaining.
We don't know. We never have, and we never had to, but we have to now. Joy, and I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, I look back to that book that I wrote, and I saw Trump coming, but I don't think I saw it being as horrible as it is, or saw it being as huge as it is in terms of there being roughly 47%. Let's just say 40. That makes me feel better. It's 47%, but 40. But that's more than I ever thought would be part of this kind of what I perceive as anti-American and kind of dangerous group of people that doesn't believe in democracy anymore because they no longer outnumber us. And that's sort of the bottom line of it. That's really the foundational point of how we got here.
And Susan, in another era and time, we call this fascism, right? When you have this absolute devotion to a singular leader, when you have this desperate need to elevate the race that's considered sort of the top dog race, right, in the society, and to hang on to their power at all costs, even violence. There's this belief that political violence is okay. There was this terrifying poll out in February that a really shocking percentage of Republicans believe it's okay to use violence to overturn an election if they don't get the results that they want. It's like, and AEI took this poll. This wasn't some liberal group. It wasn't Daily Kos. It was the American Enterprise Institute took this poll and found that like 4 in 10 Republicans are okay with the idea of political violence. And let's talk a little bit about Texas for just a moment. You remember Allen West? I do. Allen West was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs before Trump came along. He was saying take a bayonet and march to Washington because President Obama was there, and he's black. Okay? Allen West is now in Texas. He's now running against Greg Abbott because he doesn't think Greg Abbott is far right enough. After all that Greg Abbott has done. He has argued that Islam is not a religion, but a totalitarian, theocratic political ideology. He has suggested black communities were stronger and better during segregation. So he's anti-Dr. King. He's called democratic handouts, quote unquote, the most insidious form of slavery remaining in the world today. And he's viable, Susan, in your party. Thoughts?
He also believes in QAnon and succession. So, and here's the thing. You talked about fascism early on. Really, I've been looking for a new word for Trumpism because I hate it, because I think it goes deeper than just Donald Trump within the Republican Party. And I keep coming back to the same name. It's neo-fascism. Forget Trumpism. It's neo-fascism. That's what the grassroots of the party looks like right now. And in some ways, in a really weird way, people who believe in democracy, normal Republicans and Democrats and independents, they should be almost happy Allen West is running. Why? Because he may win. And if he wins, he will be a very weak challenger to whoever the Democrats put up. We are seeing these really ultra right-wing candidates being put up by Republican parties, and not just in Texas, but in Ohio and other places in these congressional seats, that the wackiest wackies are going to win the Republican primary, but they're going to lose in general elections. And that may not just help Democrats, but it will help the Republican Party in a way, because it will burn it down. Maybe not in 2022 or 2024, but after enough losses, we can see maybe normal returning, because those neo-fascists will be out of the party.